March, 1783. The snow lies thick and heavy over the military encampment at Newburgh, New York. To the rest of the world, America had just achieved the impossible. Against all mathematical odds, a ragged, underfunded, and starving Continental Army had broken the spine of the British Empire, the most powerful military force on the planet. The long, bloody war for independence was effectively won. Peace was on the horizon, but inside the frozen wooden barracks of the American camp, a dark, toxic realization was setting in. The enemy across the ocean was defeated, but a new enemy within was just waking up. For months, the men who had bled at Valley Forge, frozen at Trenton, and fought to the bitter end at Yorktown had received nothing from their government but empty promises. The Continental Congress in Philadelphia was utterly broke. They refused to send food, they refused to send clothing, and most dangerously, they refused to pay the soldiers their back wages. These men had left their farms in ruins and their families in deep poverty, all for the sacred promise of liberty. Now, facing total financial ruin, the officers realized that the very country they had just birthed was abandoning them. Panic quickly turned to absolute rage. On March 10th, an anonymous letter began circulating through the tattered camp, penned by a young officer named Major John Armstrong. It called for a secret, unauthorized meeting of all high-ranking officers on March 15th. The message written on that parchment was explicit and terrifying. If Congress did not pay them immediately, the army would no longer protect them. If peace was declared, the army would refuse to disband. They would keep their muskets, keep their cannons, march directly on the capital of Philadelphia, and take their gold by force of arms. It was the birth of a military coup. The fragile dream of an American republic was about to die in its cradle, replaced by a ruthless military dictatorship. America was on the verge of exchanging a British king for an American tyrant. And only one man stood in their way. The fateful morning of March 15th arrived. Hundreds of angry officers packed tightly into a large, crudely built wooden chapel known to the camp as the Temple of Virtue. The air inside was suffocating, thick with tobacco smoke, heavy sweat, and mutinous fury. At the front of the room sat Major General Horatio Gates, a man who secretly despised George Washington and quietly cheered on the rebellion, eager to take command himself. The atmosphere was highly coordinated. The speakers were prepared to whip the crowd into a political frenzy, call a vote to overthrow the civilian government, and alter the course of human history forever. General Gates called the meeting to order. But before the first mutinous speech could even begin, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the chapel suddenly slammed open. The room dropped into a stunned, icy, dead silence. Walking down the center aisle, tall, imposing, and completely uninvited, is General George Washington. The officers did not cheer for their commander. Instead, they stared at him with cold, hardened, resentful eyes. To them, Washington was no longer just their brother-in-arms. He was now the face of the political establishment that was starving them out. Washington calmly stepped up to the wooden podium and looked out at the men he had led through 8 brutal years of war. He began to read a prepared speech. He told them that a military mutiny would wash the streets of their new nation in blood. He begged them to trust that Congress would eventually pay what was owed. But his words were bouncing off stone walls. The men sat with their arms crossed, their faces grim. The speech was failing. The rebellion was still very much alive. Washington could feel the room slipping completely away. The fate of the United States hung on a razor's edge. Desperate to reach them, he remembered a letter he had recently received from a sympathetic congressman, Joseph Jones, promising that financial help was on the way. Washington pulled the wrinkled paper from his coat pocket to read it aloud. He opened it, looked down at the handwriting, and suddenly froze. The text was a complete blur. The room watched him, deeply confused by the sudden, awkward delay. Sensing he was losing his men entirely, Washington stopped. His hands shook slightly. He reached back inside the pocket of his uniform jacket. The officers looked on, wondering if the great general was about to present a grand decree, an ultimatum, or perhaps a final command. Instead, he pulled out a new pair of silver-framed reading spectacles, something none of his officers had ever seen him wear before. He had always hidden his physical frailties from his men to maintain an image of absolute strength. As he clumsily adjusted the glasses onto his face, he looked out at his officers with a soft, vulnerable expression, and murmured a line that would echo through history. "Gentlemen, you will permit me to put on my spectacles, for I have not only grown gray but almost blind in the service of my country." In an instant, the remaining armor of anger in that room completely evaporated. Officers covered their faces, weeping openly. The devastating blow of Washington's humility hit them all at once. They realized the profound truth: Washington wasn't their enemy. He hadn't betrayed them. He had sacrificed just as much, if not more, than any of them. He had given his health, his eyesight, and his prime years to the exact same cause. He was suffering right alongside them. As Washington finished reading the letter and quietly left the chapel, the officers voted unanimously to pledge their absolute loyalty to Congress. The Newburgh Conspiracy was dead. To truly understand why Washington chose to calm a rebellion rather than ride its fury to absolute power, we have to look at the unique culture that shaped early America. The Founding Fathers were deeply obsessed with classical history, specifically the ancient Roman story of Lucius Quinctius Cincinnatus. In the year 458 BC, Rome faced total annihilation from invading enemy tribes. In a panic, the Roman Senate took an extreme constitutional step. They appointed a humble citizen named Cincinnatus as dictator, handing him absolute, unchecked power over the entire state to save the city. Cincinnatus left his farm, raised an army, marched to war, and completely crushed the invading forces in just 15 days. He held the absolute fate of the Western world in his bare hands. He could have ruled as king of Rome for the rest of his days. Instead, on the very 16th day, he walked directly into the Senate, resigned his absolute dictatorship, stripped off his military uniform, and went right back to his simple farm to pull his wooden plow. Constitutions are only as strong as the leaders who respect them. By choosing weakness over force, Washington established the single greatest safeguard of modern democracy, that the gun must always submit to the ballot. In that one humble gesture, Washington became America's Cincinnatus. History is full of hidden choices. Subscribe to the Moral Archive Chronicles and never miss a chapter.